From the first European settlements on the East Coast to the final closing of the frontier in the late 19th century, the story of the American West is one of courage, conflict, and constant transformation. It's a tale that has shaped the very identity of the United States. So how did a handful of coastal colonies expand across an entire continent? Let's saddle up and explore the epic history of the American frontier. Our story begins in the 17th and 18th centuries. The frontier wasn't some distant, dusty landscape. It was just beyond the Appalachian Mountains. For the colonists, this was the edge of their known world, a dense wilderness inhabited by numerous Native American nations for thousands of years. Early pioneers like the legendary Daniel Boone were driven by a hunger for land and opportunity. In 1775, Boone blazed the Wilderness Road through the Cumberland Gap, opening up Kentucky to settlement. These early frontiersmen were often hunters, trappers, and small-scale farmers, living a life of rugged self-sufficiency. They were the trailblazers, pushing the boundaries of the colonies westward, often leading to friction and violent clashes with indigenous peoples whose lands they were entering. This period set the stage for a pattern of expansion and conflict that would define the next century. The game changed dramatically in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. With a single stroke of a pen, President Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of the United States. The nation now stretched to the Rocky Mountains, but this vast territory was a complete mystery. To map this new land and find a water route to the Pacific, Jefferson dispatched the Lewis and Clark expedition. From 1804 to 1806, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, guided by their indispensable Shoshone interpreter Sacagawea, journeyed thousands of miles from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean and back. Their expedition was a monumental success. They documented hundreds of new plant and animal species, mapped the geography, and established American claims to the Oregon country. More importantly, their journey fired the imagination of the American people. The West was no longer just a vague concept. It was a real place, filled with promise and adventure. The era of the mountain men followed, as fur trappers plunged into the rock. The 1840s and 50s saw the frontier spirit explode into a national movement known as Manifest Destiny. This was the widely held belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. This ideology fueled an incredible wave of migration. The Oregon Trail, a grueling 2,000-mile journey, saw hundreds of thousands of pioneers pack their lives into covered wagons, enduring disease, starvation, and accidents in search of fertile farmland in the Willamette Valley. At the same time, the California Gold Rush of 1849 drew fortune seekers from around the globe. The 49ers, as they were called, transformed California overnight, turning sleepy settlements into bustling boomtowns. This rapid influx of people, however, came at a tremendous cost to the Native American populations and the environment. The quest for gold and land intensified conflicts and led to the forced displacement of countless. Following the Civil War, the expansion of the West accelerated at an unprecedented pace. The key driver was the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869 at Promontory, Utah. This engineering marvel linked the country from east to west. Journeys that once took months by wagon could now be completed in a matter of days. The railroad wasn't just a transportation route, it was an engine of settlement. Railroad companies were granted vast tracts of land along their routes, which they sold cheaply to attract settlers. This led to the rise of the great cattle drives and the iconic American cowboy. For about 2 decades, cowboys drove millions of longhorn cattle from the open ranges of Texas north to the railheads in Kansas, where they were shipped to eastern markets. This was the era of legendary trail towns like Dodge City and Abilene, filled with saloons, shootouts, and the larger-than-life figures that would dominate Western folklore. But as settlers, ranchers, and miners flooded the Great Plains, they inevitably came into conflict with the Native American tribes who had called these lands home for centuries. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Apache, and Comanche, among others, were powerful horse-mounted cultures whose way of life depended on the vast buffalo herds. The U.S. government's policy shifted from negotiation and treaties, which were often broken, to outright military confrontation and forced relocation onto reservations. This period, known as the Indian Wars, saw a series of brutal conflicts. While Native American warriors achieved stunning victories, such as the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, where Lakota and Cheyenne forces defeated General Custer's 7th Cavalry. The tide was against them. The systematic slaughter of the buffalo, encouraged by the government to undermine the tribe's source of survival, combined with superior military force, ultimately broke the resistance. The Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 is the final chapter of the classic frontier era was the land rush. The government sought to settle the last remaining pockets of unclaimed territory. The most famous of these events was the Oklahoma Land Rush of 1889. At the sound of a cannon, some 50,000 settlers raced to stake their claims on 2 million acres of former Indian territory. It was a chaotic spectacle that symbolized the insatiable hunger for land that had driven westward expansion from the very beginning. Just 1 year later, in 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau made a momentous declaration. There was no longer a discernible frontier line in the country. The continuous wave of settlement had effectively filled in the continent. The wild, untamed west of popular imagination was officially closed. The closing of the frontier marked the end of an era, but its legacy is everywhere. It shaped America's character, fostering ideals of individualism, self-reliance, and reinvention. It also left a complex and often painful legacy of conquest, displacement, and environmental transformation. The stories of pioneers, cowboys, Native American warriors, and gold miners have become a core part of American mythology, endlessly retold in movies, books, and television. From the first steps into the Appalachian wilderness to the final land rush in Oklahoma, the history of the American frontier is the sprawling, dramatic, and often contradictory story of how a nation was built. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of the past. Let us know in the comments what piece of frontier history fascinates you the most. See you next time.